welcome to the Hennessy's House podcast with me, your host, Nicole Hennessy. Today, we're talking to Dr. Debbie Silber, who I had the pleasure of seeing on a TED Talk and asked her to come on our show. She's an expert in her field. She is the author of a book called Trust Again, as well as has her own website, PBT Institute, and her own podcast, Betrayal to Breakthrough with Dr. Debbie Silber. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to dive deep with you on post-betrayal trauma.
Thanks so much. Looking forward to our conversation.
So I want to start at the very base so people have a general idea of what we're talking about. So can you just take a moment to define for us what post-betrayal trauma means?
Yeah, well, I studied betrayal. First of all, you don't study something like betrayal unless you have to. You know, I had a horrible family betrayal and I thought I learned everything I needed to learn. And apparently there were more opportunities coming my way. And the next one was my husband. And so it's traumatic for anybody who's experienced it. And got him out of the house and I was like, oh, okay, what do I do now? I have 4 kids, 6 dogs, a business. And I was like, let me enroll in a PhD program. So it was in transpersonal psychology, the psychology of transformation and human potential. And because I was obsessed with transformation, that's what was happening. And I didn't quite understand it. Then it was time to do a study. So I studied betrayal. What holds us back? What helps us heal? And what happens to us physically, mentally, and emotionally when the people closest to us lie, cheat, and deceive. And that study led to 3 groundbreaking discoveries. One was, you mentioned betrayal trauma. One was that healing from betrayal is very different than healing from other types of life crises, death of a loved one, disease, natural disaster. You know, it's like when you lose someone you love, like for example, I lost my mom, you grieve, you're sad, you mourn the loss, life will never be the same. But you don't question everything. You don't question the love. You don't question your very sanity. You don't necessarily take it personally. Betrayal feels so intentional. So you take it so personally. The whole self has to be rebuilt. Confidence, belonging, worthiness, rejection, abandonment, trust. They're huge. They all have to be rebuilt. So if I were to give you an equation, it would be post-traumatic growth, which is kind of like the upside of trauma, how that trauma leaves you with a new insight, awareness, perspective. But that's general to any type of trauma. Post-traumatic growth plus rebuilding of the self equals post-betrayal transformation. That's the work we do within the PBT community.
Transformation.
It's rebuild, it's healing from the trauma, rebuilding the self. It's the specific healing, total healing after a traumatic betrayal.
Absolutely. I mean, that makes perfect sense. And what you say about it being so different, I never thought of it that way. And it makes so much sense. And you did mention that, I believe, in your TED Talk. And I was like, oh, because it is so much more personal. And I've been through betrayal myself in a few different forms as well. And who really hasn't? I feel like most people can in some way relate to this, right? In some way.
You're right. Because
And
if it's
some
not,
don't even notice it.
they don't. And the thing is, if it's not the big ones, the obvious ones, like your best friend shared your secret, your partner had an affair, the coworker like took credit for your idea, whatever it is, we'll be there for mom and dad one day, and then that day comes and they're not. Like there are so many different types. Or think about it, a child who's completely dependent on their parent, and then the parent does something awful.
Or even so in my family, my daughter, my oldest is 17, and her biological father is not in the picture. And in a way, to me, that feels for her like betrayal, even though he's never been in the picture. And my husband is dad, and it doesn't matter. She loves my husband as her own father, but she knows in the back of her head that there was this man who created her, who decided that he didn't want to be involved in her life.
Yeah.
And that is betrayal.
Of course.
Right? This betrayal can start right at birth.
And it could even be a betrayal of expectations, betrayal of what you wanted and didn't get. If the idea is I'm going to have a mom and I'm going to have a dad and they're both going to love me, and then they don't, or they leave, or whatever happens, of course we could feel like, yes, that is a betrayal. And so often, and what we do, the work we do in the community, it's betrayal of self too, because if we feel less than, unworthy, all of these things, I don't matter because of an experience, right? Then we're setting ourselves up for relationships to like prove that. And then what happens is we know someone or something isn't in our best interest and we keep going back to it or to them. Like that's self betrayal. So
Right.
it,
Doing the same thing over and over again and
Mhm.
expecting different results,
Yeah,
right? That's
definition of insanity.
there you go. I'm like, I think it's insanity, but I'm
Uh-huh.
afraid I'm going to say it and be wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's what you're saying there, right? It's like you keep hoping for different results and doing the same things or trusting the same people. So can you tell me a little bit about what do you think the most common symptoms are for somebody who's been faced with this kind of trauma?
Yeah, and that's actually part of the second discovery was that there is this collection of symptoms so common to betrayal. It's known as post-betrayal syndrome. And we've had over 13,000 people, every age group, almost every country represented. And, about 13,000 people in the last year and a half or so take the post-betrayal syndrome quiz that we have. And it's also so amazing because we've all been told time heals all wounds. Well, I have the proof that that's not true. When it comes to betrayal, that's simply not the case because there's a question that reads, "Is there anything else you'd like to share?" And people say, like, "My betrayal happened 35 years ago. I'm unwilling to trust again. My betrayal happened 15 years ago. I feel gutted." Like it stays with you until you face it, feel it, heal it. So some of the symptoms, I actually pulled some stats for you. Every couple of months, I'll pull some stats
Yeah.
just to see where people stand. So this is out of 13,000 plus people. Um, just some of them. Let's see. 64% say they struggle emotionally. Here's just some physical ones. 71% have low energy. 68% have sleep issues. 63% extreme fatigue. So you could sleep and then you wake up and you're exhausted.
Okay.
47% have weight changes. 45% have digestive issues. That could be anything. IBS,
That was
yeah.
mine. That was me for
Crohn's,
sure.
yeah. And
Because it's triggered with anxiety almost, right? And those are also my anxiety symptoms,
yeah,
right?
and that's just the physical. Here's some mental. 79% are overwhelmed. 70% are walking around in a state of disbelief. 68% unable to focus. 64% shock, and 62% unable to concentrate. So think about it. Here you are, you're trying to raise your kids, do your work. You can't focus, and you have a gut issue. That's not even the emotional symptoms,
Right.
right? So here, 88% extreme sadness. 3% anger. Just mix those two, and that could be lethal, right? 82% feel hurt, 80% are anxious, 79% are stressed. So here's why I wrote trust again. 84% have an inability to trust, 67% prevent themselves from forming deep relationships because they're afraid of being hurt again. 82% find it hard to move forward, and 90% want to move forward, but they don't know how.
And you know, if you can't move, like the not being able to trust people and build strong relationships after a betrayal, you're not going to be happy.
It's like living
You
half a life.
like yeah. I mean, and then I'm sure that other things can form because of that, depression, anxiety. Like these things it's triggering other long-term issues for yourself if you don't do the work to heal. And I wanted to ask you this question because you hear a lot people say forgiveness is about forgiving for yourself, for your
Mhm,
own healing.
mhm,
And when you're talking about betrayal specifically, I
mhm,
feel like that's such a harder concept because you have how do you forgive somebody that you're not ready to forgive to heal yourself?
mhm.
Right?
Yeah,
And that doesn't mean like I don't know, I want you to like talk about that a little bit, but to me it feels like that doesn't mean I have to go up to the person and say I forgive you
mhm,
for what you've done, right? And that's like where we subconsciously go when we think about forgiveness, right?
mhm.
Confronting the person with a forgiveness.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and here's the thing, forgiveness is so important for us, we know that, but it's brutal when if and especially what I've seen so often, when you go for forgiveness before you're ready, it backfires every single time. And so often there are so many people who say, well, I just want this over with. Let me just forgive and just, just move on. Well, if you're not ready, then it's just not going to work, even if it's for us. And it is, because what happens is that's how we let go of the power that this pain has over us. But and that's why, we in the 5 stages, that was another one of the discoveries. Forgiveness has a very important role at a very certain time. And it's one of those things, other things have to happen first. So for a lot of people, I would say move towards acceptance before forgiveness. And forgiveness also doesn't mean reconciling. That's a whole other universe. You know,
True.
you
And
know,
I think we typically define them together as one thing, but they don't
yeah.
have to be,
Not
right?
at all. And it's two very different things. Like in my case, and we teach when to know if it's safe and in your best interest to forgive and reconcile, let's say, or when it's in your best interest to move on. So, for example, like with my family, it just was not an option. So for me, you rebuild yourself, you forgive for your own sake, and you move on. Now, in the situation with my husband, as this is if the situation lends itself, if you're willing and if you want to, as two completely transformed people, then you have an opportunity to forgive, reconcile some and build something entirely new and different with that person who hurt you. That's what I did with my husband. We married each other again. But the only way that happens is when you have a complete and utter death and destruction of the old you, the old relationship, in order to rebirth the new. But you never, unless you're
Yeah.
willing to let go of that old, you never know what'll show up. And there were 3 groups in my study who didn't heal. And the group where, let's say, the betrayer had no consequences. So whether it was for out of financial fear, not wanting to break up a family, religious reasons, that played a big role.
Yeah.
I only saw 2 things. The only thing I saw was a further deterioration of the relationship. And by far, hands down, that group was the most physically sick, because your heart can't take that, you know?
No.
But with so many of them, they were afraid of that, catastrophic, that's it, the relationship is dead and gone. But having said that, that's the only place that you have the opportunity to build something new.
It's interesting you bring that up because I was going to ask you about the circumstances of when you're in a marriage and there's an
Mhm.
affair, for example, right? Because that's a huge common betrayal, unfortunately, more common than it should be. And you try to work it out, or you have a religious belief system where divorce doesn't feel like an option to you.
It's a tough one, and I saw that really with everybody in my study, and it's so amazing because there was such a spiritual component that started showing up, and it was whether you move towards the spiritual side of your religion.
Yeah.
Many of them abandoned religion completely; they didn't feel like their religion supported them, or they weren't spiritual at all, and they became spiritual. And I was like, "What's that all about?" And I know that was the case with me. I was already spiritual; I became much more spiritual, and it was really for 2 reasons. This is such a shock and such trauma. Think about it. This could be the very person or the very people who gave us a sense of safety and security. And these are the very people who shatter that sense of safety and security. So we need to feel grounded. We need to believe in something other than us. We need to feel connected. So that was a really big
Yeah.
reason for it. And when trust is shattered, which is so foundational, we don't trust our betrayer. We don't even trust ourselves because we're like, I'm a bright person. How did I not see? How did I not know? So we kind of venture, well, at least I can trust in something other than me. And that was the reason for spirituality too.
Is that a big part of the healing?
Hmm.
Because okay, so I definitely believe in trusting your gut,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And I feel like in a lot of betrayal situations, we have chosen to ignore our gut. Like I don't want to keep using the same example, but I'm going to like in an affair, if you're like, you know, who was calling you in the middle of the night?
Hmm.
Nobody called me in the middle of the night. What are you talking about? You're crazy. And you like you're questioning yourself then and you're like,
Hmm.
okay, well, maybe I'm just being paranoid. I should trust him. I have no reason not to trust him, right? And
Hmm.
you talk yourself out of it. And you know, it's, there's just a lot of betrayal issues where I feel like the gut comes into play. And when you've chosen to ignore your gut
Hmm.
and then later you're reflecting and you're like, I should have listened to myself.
Hmm.
Can I even trust myself?
Hmm.
How do I know if what I'm thinking and doing is the right thing?
Yeah. And you know what? Our gut, I remember a mentor saying, our gut's like 10,000 times more perceptive than our mind. So you get that gut intuitive hit, and then we talk ourselves out of it. And that's why, I mean, in Trust Again, I teach a 4-step trust rebuilding process. I could share it right here if that would serve your audience.
Absolutely. I
Sure.
think definitely like tips on it.
Yeah.
Don't give away your whole show, but like,
I'm here to serve. So think about it. When trust is shattered, because it's so foundational, like first, I look at trust like a brick wall.
okay.
That brick wall is constructed by, brick by brick by brick. There's really no other way that I know of that to get that brick wall built. Well, think about it. In one earth-shattering moment, the whole wall can come tumbling down. And that the person who shattered it can totally walk away, and you can look at the rubble of bricks and say, I don't have the least bit of interest watching this thing get rebuilt. Totally fine. If you choose to, this is what reconciling is you being willing to watch that brick wall be rebuilt, and the person who did the betraying being a really good bricklayer, where every opportunity they have to show that they're trustworthy is a brick in that brick wall. So it's a process, and it takes time, especially if they're the ones to shatter it. So here's the 4-step trust rebuilding process. Of course, in Trust Again, I go in much greater detail, along with the 5 stages. I walk people through how to move through the 5 stages of betrayal. But so because it's so foundational, right? Your foundation has been shattered, rocked completely. You need to start with the very foundation. So you need to question the most basic things in life. Like I'm talking, will the sun rise? I don't know. Is it going to rise? I have no idea. And you test it. You go outside, oh, sure enough, there it is. But I still don't believe it. So try it another few times until you feel like, you know what, I can count on that. I can trust that. You move on to the next stage. And the next stage, just like you said, trusting your gut, right? If something feels like you can't trust it, trust it. If something feels like you can, trust it. And, of course, it's so much bigger than that. But it's almost like, you ever see those people where like their mouth is smiling, but their eyes aren't? Like it's just weird. It's not a
Yeah.
Botox thing. It's like a weird incongruent, things aren't lining up.
Yeah.
Trust it. Trust it. Or like a baby laughing, trust it. You see what I'm saying? And this way, what trust feels like again,
Yeah.
what a lack of trust feels like again. And when you feel that, you could feel a little bit of support, a little bit of safety. You have like a ground to stand on. Okay, I know the sun's going to rise. I can trust my gut. And then you move to stage 3. And stage 3 is learning to trust in yourself. Just like you said, because it's true. You're like, I can't even trust myself. So what you do to rebuild that is you give yourself little tasks and then you do them. I'm going to work out today. Then you do. I'm going to make that phone call. And then you do. I'm not going to call my ex. And then you don't. Whatever it is for you, right? And what you're doing is you're showing your word means something. You can be trusted. So now if you rebuild the very foundation, right? And then you trust your gut, and now you trust yourself, you feel like you have some support here.
Yeah.
And from that space and only that space, do you carefully and cautiously start trusting in others. But I think so often we want to bypass that and just go to trusting others without building that sense of safety and security back.
First of all, I love visuals, so I really appreciate how you're explaining it because that's how I'm a very visual person. And the fact that so many people do skip ahead is where we end up in that vicious cycle again,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Where because we don't trust ourselves and we have a pattern of like the type of people we attract or whatever it is, then we're bringing that right back in. And then we're over and over again dealing with betrayal, and I mean, it is an interesting concept that, to that we have to learn to trust ourselves to heal because it just seems so obvious. Like why aren't you trusting yourself?
And we have good reason because we
Yeah.
look at it and say, I had no idea. How could I not know? You weren't supposed to know.
Right.
and you don't think that way. So how could you see something like that coming? And the worst thing that people do is they say, well, that's it. And this is how I know an unhealed betrayal from a mile away. We see it in health and work and relationships. But so often we have these repeat betrayals. Like you said, it's like it's not healed. The faces change, but it's the same thing, you
Yeah.
know? Or people put that big wall up. They're like, no, 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 that was way too painful. Been there, done that, not doing that again. And they think it's out of strength. It's not. It's out of fear. They don't.
Yeah.
They don't want to take that the potential of that on again. So
Yeah.
they keep everybody at bay, and it's really not fair. And to them. And this is what we see in a typical, like, out of the 5 stages. I see this in stage 3 all the time.
Can we talk about like what you feel is the biggest internal consequences for trauma? Like when when you're trying to move past it and you're working through these stages, like
Mhm.
what do you see people struggle with the utmost?
Yeah, the it depends what stage they're in. Out of the 5 stages, it truly depends. Where they're at. I see so often that link um, between betrayal and blame and shame, and and how we take it so personally. We take it so personally, and it truly has nothing to do with us.
No.
And when and here's what I would suggest too: even if you have to say it a million times, it's worth it. Even though it happened to you, it's not about you.
Yeah.
But we don't believe that. And so all of our actions and the things we do, the things we think, are coming from that space of what was wrong with me.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah. I think in general we do that to ourselves in so many ways.
Hmm.
Like, what's
Yeah.
wrong with me? Am I good enough to do this? Self-doubt is such a big thing. I think,
Yeah.
I, as a mom and having like that surrounding audience, right? Like a lot of my friends are mothers. I feel like that's something I hear from everybody
Well,
all the
sure.
time.
And I remember, I mean, I have 4 kids, and I remember having my first, and I'm thinking, everybody, any mom has to know more than me. Everybody, what do I know about any of this? And, we forget that everybody's doing the best they can from whatever their space is. And who's to say we don't know? We say that.
Yeah. And you got to trust yourself enough that what you're doing for you or your family or your career or whatever is what's best for you. And that doesn't mean it's what's best for Sally next door.
Of course.
Right. And that's a big part of trusting yourself. You have to
Mhm.
stop listening to society, right? In general, of like, this is the right way to do things and go,
Mhm.
well, what do I think? How do I want things to look for me?
Right. And if you're
Right.
doing things to please others, I mean, good luck with that one. That's just
Because
never
you
going to
never
happen.
will. Oh my gosh.
It's crazy, and it's amazing because here I'm looking at it like, for a while, think about it. This is a ridiculously vulnerable topic, and I'm a very private person. And listen, any good coach has a coach, right? And I will never forget my coach one day, and I was talking all about the study and the study and the study, and he just stopped me cold. And we were on a big Zoom call with like everybody in the group, and he said, "Stop hiding behind your effing study already." And I was like, "Oh." Like, that was
Oh,
really hard. And I knew I was helping people one on one, and they were shocked and blown away with how I was healing and moving through my own experience. And I was like, all right, what if I shared this and talk about, I mean, being vulnerable in trust again, my whole story, it's in there. And that's a really hard thing because
yeah.
people judge. And I have to tell you, I was that woman years ago when someone rebuilt something with their partner, thinking that, they're weak or they're this or whatever. Let me tell you, like, moving on, it would have been so much easier, so much easier. Rebuilding with that person,
Yeah.
it is slaying every dragon, facing every demon. And I just made a deal with myself. I'm like, listen, the trolls are going to come, but I'm here to help the ones who need to hear it.
Yeah. But no matter what you do, somebody's going to have an opinion on
Yeah,
it. I
yeah.
mean, but that's a great part about life. Like, if we all thought and did exactly the same thing, we would all have one career. Like,
Mhm.
there would be one job in the entire world, right?
Yeah,
Like, no,
yeah.
it would be so boring. Like we're
Yeah.
supposed to have different thoughts and processes, I want to go back just for a second. And when we were talking about how you look back and you say like, well, you weren't supposed to know this in
Hmm.
that moment.
Hmm. Yeah.
I feel like I want to talk like sexual assault, for
Hmm.
example, right?
Yeah.
Which is obviously it's a betrayal. A lot of times sexual assault happens with somebody that you knew.
Hmm.
Not always, but it does. And I have been in contact with many people that have been through sexual assault. And one thing that I very, very commonly hear
Hmm.
is, well, I should have done this
Hmm.
in that moment. I should have yelled for help. I should have kicked him here. I should have done this, whatever it is. And I always respond, and this is kind of along these same lines with like, but you did the best you could in that moment because that's who you were then. Now you're reflecting as a person who's been through that and you're picturing it with a different set of eyes and more tools in your toolbox.
Exactly.
And
Exactly. We're
that's got to
always doing
be,
the best we can from our current state. Think about it. Even a betrayer, if they were awake and aware and truly tuning into who they were and what they needed, they would never hurt someone, right? It's someone doing something like that. They're really clueless. But using your example, of course, anybody who's been assaulted, they're doing the best they can.
yeah.
And so
And it's
to
never your fault. Like, let's
no,
reiterate that really
no,
quick. Like, betrayal of any sort, sexual assault, an affair, it's never, I
no,
should have been a better wife. I could have been,
no,
I should have done my makeup more. I should have been more pleasing in the bedroom or
no,
whatever your situation is. There's nothing you could have done.
no.
This is their issue.
And this is why the wrong type of support does more harm than good. Because just
Yeah.
along those lines, like, and I hear this in my community all the time, where people are so grateful that, we have certified coaches who are trained in moving people through the 5 stages,
Yeah.
but they have so often been to, let's say, a therapist who isn't highly skilled in betrayal. So let's just take a typical scenario that happens so often. So we'll take, a narcissistic husband and a wife, and she's been betrayed, and she's able to drag him to counseling, couples counseling, and they walk in, and now here he is, very charismatic, even puts on the crocodile tears. So then the counselor, the therapist, says to the wife, so often this happens, well, if you communicated better, this may not have happened, right? Or something like that. And the wife is like, what? you know and so it's so hard. So no,
Or
no, it's not your fault. No.
And I bet you in those situations, they believe it because you hear it from him. And
Hmm.
then when people are like that, they're super charismatic. The outside world, I just actually did another podcast interview with a woman who just left her husband, who was a narcissist
Hmm.
and years of mental abuse, right?
Yeah.
So we were discussing something along these lines too. But when everybody around you, like you have the same friends and they're like, your husband's so great and he's so charismatic, or your wife's so wonderful. And
Hmm.
there's this whole different person behind your
Yeah.
closed doors that nobody sees but you. And then you have a therapist as well that you're trusting, that you're going to and trusting to
Yeah.
help you through this, reassure you that you're crazy.
Hmm. Yeah. And that's why it's so important to know you're not crazy, you're not alone, and you can heal from all of it. Because we don't know that, and we think, well, it must be us, because am I crazy? Like, I think I'm, okay. Why would this happen? And why would these people be confirming it? You know what I mean? So it's so crucial. You better be very careful who you're talking to, who you're spending your time with.
Yeah, who your support system is. and
Yeah.
and I'm a big advocate for therapists. Like I love therapy. I have a therapist. Like I'm all about it. But I do agree with you that like there are certain circumstances that you do need somebody who really understands and specializes in a
Mhm.
specific type of healing.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely, because then, you feel heard, you feel understood, you feel validated, and they've been there, so you can trust them. So even if you don't trust, and that's the hard thing too, because this was the person you trusted the most who proved untrustworthy. So now
Yeah.
you're like, I'm supposed to trust you, stranger, right? So it takes a lot, but knowing that someone's been there, that they get it, and that they have a protocol to help you heal, and you're not going to be blamed. I mean, of course, we always want to take responsibility for ourselves, but that doesn't mean take the blame. Different thing.
Yeah. You know what's interesting about your like the stages of working through? This kind of reminds me of like AA,
And we haven't
right?
even talked about the stages. Though, yeah, if you want me to go through the 5 stages, I definitely can. And
Yeah,
it is
can you? Because
profound.
this is what it sounds like to me a little bit, right? Like you can't jump ahead. You
Mm-mm.
can't go from 0 to step 5. You have to
Yeah.
start with step 1, and there's a lot of work to be done in each set. So like it's not like you can decide you want change in your life and change overnight. It
Mm-mm.
doesn't work that way. You have to be willing to give this time and energy, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And everyone will know exactly the stage they're in when I go through them. So the first stage was just a setup stage. And I saw this with every participant, me too. If you imagine 4 legs of a table, the 4 legs being physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, what I saw with everybody was a real heavy lean on the physical and mental and kind of ignoring the emotional and the spiritual. So what does it look like? It looks like we're really good at thinking and doing and not really paying much attention to the feeling and being. And you were
Yeah.
talking about intuition. That's where our intuition lies. And we turn that down, right? So imagine a table with only 2 legs, easy for that table to topple over. Just want to qualify. That's not to say that means if you're busy, it's a setup for betrayal. It's just what I saw. Stage 2, by far the scariest stage. This is the shock, D-Day, Discovery Day. This is the breakdown of the body, the mind, the worldview. So this, you've ignited the stress response now, and you're headed for every single stress-related symptom, illness, condition, disease. Your mind is in a state of overwhelmed chaos. This makes no sense. And your worldview is shattered. The worldview is your mental model. These are the rules. This is how it works. Don't go there. Trust this person. And in a moment, every rule is no longer. Bottom has bottomed down on you. But think about it. If the bottom down on you, you'd grab hold of anything and everything you could to stay safe and stay alive. And that's stage 3. Survival instincts emerge. It's so practical. Can you help me? If not, get out of my way. Where do I live? Who can I trust? Where do I go? How do I survive my experience? Here's the trap though. Because stage 3, survival, feels so much better than the shock and trauma of where we just came from, we're like, whew, okay, I'm good. And we start settling in. We have no idea there's stage 4 and stage 5. But here's what
That
happens.
makes sense.
Yeah. So now we start getting some small self benefits. We get to be right. We get our story. We get someone to blame. We get a target for our anger. We get sympathy from everybody we talk to. It starts feeling good. So we plant roots. And then the longer we're there, now we start doing things like, well, maybe you deserved it. Maybe you're not all that. Maybe, and we're planting deeper roots.
The
And now
self-doubt.
self-doubt comes in. And because like energy attracts like energy, now we're calling situations and circumstances and relationships to us that confirm this is where we belong. It gets even worse. I'll get you out of it though. So now, because we're not happy here and we have no idea there's anything other than this, we're trying to we're resigning ourselves to thinking this is it, as good as
Yeah.
it gets. So here's where we use food, drugs, alcohol, work, TV, keeping busy to numb, avoid, distract. So here's what happens. We do this for a day, a week, a month, a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. We're
Yeah.
in a perpetual holding pattern. So when I see someone 20 years out and they're an emotional eater, or I see someone 20 years out and they're drinking or numbing, and I say, well, do you ever think this has anything to do with your betrayal? They're like, oh my gosh, that happened 20 years ago. But do you see? They've stayed in that stage 3 that
Stay
whole
there.
time.
Yeah.
That's
And
that's
they're
where they stay.
self-medicating with whatever that may be,
Yeah,
right? Like it doesn't have to mean that you're drinking every night or smoking or doing drugs or whatever. Like whatever self-medicating looks like to you, you're doing what you need to do to get through each day.
that's it. And that's where they stay. That's that stage 3. If they're willing to get rid of those small self benefits and everything that goes with it, we do a whole bunch of things to move you from stage 3 to stage 4. Hardest space to leave. They can move to stage 4. And that's finding and adjusting to a new normal. Here's where you accept. I cannot undo my betrayal, but I control what I do with it. And I always
Mm,
use the analogy of like if you were to ever move to a new house, office, condo, whatever, you don't take all your stuff with you. It's like it's going to be okay. You're like, all right, it's not cozy, but it'll be all right. And you're not healing just yet, but you're not causing the massive damage you were causing in stage 2 and stage 3. But if you were moving, also what I started to say before, you don't take everything with you. You don't take the stuff that it's like, I don't like that stuff anymore. You don't take the things that don't represent who you want to be in your new space. If your friends weren't there for you, here's where you let them go. You do not take them from stage 3 to stage 4. You've outgrown them right here. So people say to me all the time, I've had these friends 10, 20, 30 years. Is it me? Yes. You're undergoing this major transformation. You've just outgrown them. Anyway, when we're in this space, it's good. It's our own. It's okay. We move into the 5th most beautiful stage. And this is healing, rebirth, and a new worldview. The body starts to heal. Self-love, self-care, eating well, exercising. We didn't have the bandwidth for that before. We were surviving. Now
Yeah.
we do. Our mind, we're making new rules, new boundaries, new everything based on what we've been through. And we have a new worldview based on our entire experience. And remember the 4 legs of the table? We were just all about the physical and the mental. Now we're solidly grounded because we're focused on the emotional and the spiritual too. Those are the 5 stages.
I love all your visuals, right? And things like
Mm-hmm.
that. Such a great way to give an explanation. So
Because then
thank
you
you
see it.
for, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so important. It's so important to see that. Like I've had things explained to me with like your brain is like a pathway, like a road, and
Mm-hmm.
it takes time to build a new road, right? So every day you're like paving a little bit, and as you're doing that, this road gets traveled less, and then it starts to crumble and break down, and eventually this one will be your highway,
Yeah,
right? So
that's
it's like,
good. Yeah, and I have one that is a little bit different, but same idea. And it's like this. Imagine a snowstorm, right? Snow blankets the ground and someone paves a path. But let's say that path doesn't really take you anywhere good, but it's paved and you just keep walking that path and it could take you like to a dumpster. I mean, who knows? Nowhere good. And then you say, yes, it's paved and yes, it takes me there, but I'm ready for something different. So you actually take the shovel and you shovel a new path. Well, it's going to be rocky. You're going to stumble. You may fall. But if you are committed, that's it. This is the only path I'm walking on. Eventually, that path is going to be well worn, just like the other one. But now it's taking you somewhere good.
yeah,
You know,
exactly where you want to go
that's the whole
instead
idea.
of wherever something easy takes you, right?
Random that someone else did
Yeah,
for us.
it takes
Yeah.
hard work to be our best versions of ourselves, right? And I think that these stages make perfect logical sense. And stopping at stage 3, I never even thought of that. You're right. Like this, like whole not even knowing stage 4 and 5 exist, and
Mhm.
rediscovering yourself in stage 5 is like so important, and probably also very scary, because especially if you're older, right? Like if you're in your 30s and up, I think, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
because like I've done that, right? Like
Mhm.
I went to college to do one thing and ended up doing something totally different.
Mhm.
And that's a little scary because you're like, "Ooh, I'm going to do something totally new and different." And like people are going to ask me again, outside people, and worrying
Yeah.
about judgment of like, "You've been doing this other thing your whole life. What are you doing this?" And like everyone questioning you. And then you start to question you. Like, do you see people do that and kind of jump back a stage?
Oh,
With,
100. Here's the thing. And look, I'm the perfect example. I went back for a PhD at 50. I think
yeah,
everybody I knew told me how crazy I was. They're like, Tibby, but here you are now, you're on your own. You have 4 kids, 6 dogs, a business, you're going back for a PhD. And I'm like, I can't even explain it to you, but yes, and I even didn't share it, but I had such a feeling that it was like, I was so intuitively guided. I mean, really, I just felt so called and pulled to do it. And now looking back, I see why it changed my entire life.
yeah,
And it's so interesting. I remember seeing an intuitive counselor who's since become a dear friend, and because you don't trust, and I
yeah.
remember asking her, and I was like, what the heck, and I come in and she just laughs. She's like, oh my gosh, how you two planned this. And I was like, well, what did you just say? She said, oh yeah, you needed something so catastrophic to crash and burn. He did, so he could become the husband, father, friend he's supposed to be. But you're going to heal and be able to teach from this deep place of knowing. You're going to have an institute and books and this whole following around betrayal. And I'm like, you're crazy.
And here you are.
So it's like, when you think maybe there's more to it than I understand, but at the very least, if I'm going to go through something, let me do something good with it. And I didn't do anything that anybody else couldn't do. If you experience
Yeah.
something, I feel like we're obligated. If you've learned from it, financial crisis, health challenge, whatever, how do you not pass that forward and shorten somebody else's learning curve? I don't know.
Absolutely. Listen, my entire platform is based on that. People say all the time, like, I overshare, or like, my 17-year-old daughter is a mother. And so I get a lot of,
Oh, you look like a baby yourself. How do
I'm a
you have?
grandmother.
Wow.
Yeah. So I know. Everybody's always like, what lotion do you use? I'm 35 for the record. So I had her at
Wow.
17. She had a baby at 17. So
Wow.
ha ha ha. The circle of life. But I did everything I thought I could do to prevent it. And it didn't work out that way. And that's okay. And our family is fine. And the baby lives here with us with her. She's the mom. Like, it's great. But the ridicule I got, right, as the
Yeah.
mother, like, you should have
Yeah.
done this better, you should have done that better. And then also just like telling me like I used her for clout, right? Because
Oh,
I
wow.
talked out about it, but with her permission ahead of
Hmm.
time. But people don't understand that. And the interesting part to me is like people that are afraid to speak out about their truths or like the hard things in life. That's fine. Not everybody needs to speak out about it if you're
Yeah.
not comfortable. But when you do speak out, all those people that hear it now feel less alone, and they feel like there's hope for them, and they can start to heal,
You know,
right?
you're so right. That honestly, that's why I wrote Trust Again. And I remember sitting my family down, and I said, guys, my story's in here, and whatever. And I thought they were going to be like, Mom, come on. And they were all really behind me. And my biggest supporter was my husband. And I was like, okay, what's my intention here? Uh, And I was like, am I trying to throw him under the bus? No, I'm
No,
trying to show people can change on both sides. And he was all for it. And I think the those people will have what to say. They do, and they are. But I'm here for the other ones.
I do think that, like what you're saying about your husband, my husband is a recovered alcoholic. And so there was a lot of betrayal in my marriage. It was definitely not an affair, but he had a love affair with alcohol.
Mm, yeah.
And that's how he decided to express it, right? He's like, I
Mhm.
never cheated on you, but I was cheating on you. I was cheating
Yeah.
on our marriage and on our family and with alcohol. And he's the same way. Like, I never used to share his story at all. And because I felt like it was his side of the story. And he was like, Nicole, like, you have a side of it too. And like,
Hmm.
I'm not going to stop you from speaking and being honest with your listeners.
Yeah.
Right. And I think for your husband and mine, both, they probably dealt with their own version of betrayal, but it was self betrayal.
Hmm.
Right.
Absolutely. It's a lot to heal from. But that's how do you heal that shame? You bring light and honor to it. You it just can't
You
survive
own
that.
it.
Yeah.
You own it. You forgive yourself. Right. The
Hmm.
forgiveness, like for like you and I, is towards them. Right. But the forgiveness for them is internal. And sometimes that's harder because we're so hard on ourselves.
Hmm.
Right.
Absolutely. Yep.
I feel like, oh, yeah, that's, when you put yourself in somebody else's shoes, it's like, but I know we're almost out of time. You're a busy woman, but I appreciate you giving me an hour of your
uh,
day.
thank you.
Where can people learn more about you and what you're teaching here?
Yeah, I'd say the best place, just take the post betrayal syndrome quiz to see to what extent you're struggling. And you can just find that at the PBT, as in post betrayal transformation, the pbtinstitute.com/quiz.
Perfect. And I'll link that in the information as well. And your book is also on that website,
They
correct?
can
So they
they
can
can
find
find
it
the
there.
book through, yeah, it's
And your
all there.
podcast and everything like that, if they want to hear
Hmm.
more detail about what you do. Thank you so much, Dr. Debbie Silber. I really,
Uh,
really, really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule for me.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity to share.
Thank you.